Hello, my name is Meredith Kutz, a Professional Development Associate here at NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Innovate Campus Recruiting in the Brave New World of Early Talent. It is my pleasure to introduce Tom Brunskill, CEO of Forage. Take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Meredith. I'm just rearranging all my panels here. What an exceptional community this. I'm extremely privileged to be here today. As Meredith mentioned, I'm Tom. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forage. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time today talking about what Forage does, but just for context, what we do is we partner typically with large global companies to create free open access online training courses for college students to build careers, skills and confidence. So we work with a bunch of exceptional companies, many companies that I know are attending today, such as Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, GE, to create these programs. And you know, in the last year, we saw over 1.2 million students enroll into our programs. And so that's the context in which I'm speaking to you today. And truthfully, I've thought very deeply about present today. This is a pretty rare opportunity for me to speak to so many experienced and incredible early talent professionals, many of whom we work with and we admire. And so I would be lying if I said that I wasn't a little bit nervous, because I don't want to waste this opportunity. So what I've tried to do is make it worth it. And I'm going to avoid the temptation of playing the safe route. I'm going to avoid the temptation of presenting middle of the road insights in my conversation with you all today. I'm not going to sanitize my thoughts. I'm going to do my best to share my unfiltered, honest views on campus recruiting and how I think we can improve it, how I think we can innovate it. And not all of you are going to agree with these views, and that's totally fine. But I think it's critical that we have a real open and authentic conversation in the early talent space about what we want the world of early talent to look like. So as you might remember, today's presentation is titled How to Innovate Campus Recruiting in the Brave New World of Early Talent. Now, that sounds innocent enough, but there are two words I want you to initially focus on. First is the word innovate. It's a word which is basically been stripped of all meaning, right? Like, how often do we hear the word innovate? It's overused. It's almost bereft of meaning anymore. But at its essence, it represents an incredibly important mindset. And to me, that mindset is, are you dissatisfied with the status quo? And are you willing to change it? And that leads me to the second word, which is brave, because to change the status quo, we've got to be brave. And so if you're trying to figure out whether you're innovating or you're not innovating, I would ask yourself, are you feeling uncomfortable? Do you feel a little anxious? Are you uncertain about the campus recruitment strategies and decisions that you're making? Because if you're not, and you feel like you're on autopilot, that probably means that you're doing the same thing that you've always done, which is totally fine. It's totally fine if you're happy with the status quo, but don't get that confused with innovation. And today we're talking about how to innovate campus recruiting. So expect to hear, you've been warned, expect to hear a few uncomfortable ideas. But before we ask ourselves whether we are innovating or not, right now, it's worth asking, do we even need to innovate? Because of course, not everything in the world needs to change. If something's working, we don't need to change it. When it comes to campus recruiting, my view is that it does need to change. It needs to improve. And I'm very heartened to see some incredible work happening out there in that respect already. But it has to continue to improve to benefit the companies, the employers, and it also has to improve to benefit the candidates who are at the heart of this experience. Now, I want you to bear with me as I do this exercise, but we do this exercise at our team at Forage, and it's where we use monologues to set goals. So for example, say we were setting company goals for 2021, we would actually visualize that we're 1 year in the future, it's December 2021, and who knows what the world will look like at that point. And we imagine how we would ideally want to explain our business to an outsider. So how would we describe our progress? We actually write these monologues down that verbalizes how we would describe it. And from those monologues, we reverse engineer our company goals. So for example, we might say in 2021, our monologue might be, in 2021, we saw a massive uptick in engagement with more students telling us that our courses help them land great jobs. So one of our company goals resulting from that monologue would be that we doubled the number of students who landed great jobs in 2021 as a result of our courses. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I want to apply the same logic to innovation and campus recruitment. I put together my monologue for how I would love to describe, and how I know many of our customers would love to describe, the state of campus recruitment in 5 years' time. And so here we go. This is my monologue. These days, the process to find your first job is an even playing field. It's truly inclusive, accessible, and human. If you are the candidate, you're going to have the opportunity to immerse yourself in different career options and access free resources to make better, more informed career decisions. You're going to know long before the recruitment process what roles align with your superpowers and passions. And most importantly, you'll have the confidence to apply to any role because you genuinely believe you can belong at that company. And from a company's perspective, companies no longer have to sift through thousands of resumes and cover letters. You, as campus recruiters, hire on what matters, and it feels more satisfying. The candidate's intent, their potential, their compatibility with the role, the likelihood that they're going to make an exceptional contribution to your organization. For both sides, recruiting doesn't feel like a transaction anymore. It feels human. It feels like a community of students and companies trying to find their perfect match based on authentic interactions. That's the end of my monologue. Now, if you think that's what the world looks like today, or if you don't think that's the world that we need to aspire for, then there's probably no need to innovate. But if you think the world should look like that monologue or close to it, then you need to innovate. And remember, innovating is uncomfortable. And what is, the great thing that we're seeing is, as I kind of verbalize that monologue, where I've got the inspiration from that is by observing the work and observing the intent of some of the fantastic companies that we're currently working with. Now, as you all know, 2020 was uncomfortable, as we're talking about uncomfortable. It forced a level of innovation within campus recruiting. And I don't think anyone here would argue that it felt easy or risk-free. So I don't need to go into detail about how the year impacted us, because most of us, especially here in North America, are still continuing to live through it. But the dislocation in our personal and professional lives was absolutely unprecedented in terms of its severity. And I think what we forget, its abruptness, how quickly it happened. And so I actually just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that the early talent community, you, or in many respects, wore the brunt of the impacts of COVID in the corporate world. You were the ones who were scrambling to transform your internship programs into virtual ones. Sometimes when you had thousands of interns strewn across different time zones and different parts of the country, you had to work out how to bring your physical campus recruitment operations entirely online. You had to find ways to work with different stakeholders, whether it was universities, your peers, student clubs, in new and different formats. You had to facilitate hiring and induction entirely digitally, as well as supporting your existing staff. You were all innovators in 2020, and you navigated these choppy waters with tighter budget constraints, where you were still expected to deliver the same results. And you had to do that in an environment where you were working in a completely different way as well. So we often saw at Forage that you were the last person that you would look after, look after in all of this. So I want to take a moment to recognize how incredible the early talent community has been in navigating the last 12 months. And you should really take a moment to pat yourself on the back if you haven't done already. So while 2020 caused seismic shifts in our industry, the world of campus recruitment was already changing. We were already seeing innovation. And that's because I felt like we'd reached this inflection point where both candidates and employers wanted a new system. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why we built Forage in the first place, is because we saw that employers and students were trying to do things differently. They weren't happy with the status quo. They wanted a new way. And we were seeing that some of the boldest companies out there already knew that the world was changing, and what worked yesterday wasn't going to work tomorrow. And we saw that high-performing teams had a mandate to redesign the system. And they were trying to move away from dated playbooks, transactional hiring, stifled innovation, and the like. And particularly what we were also inspired by were the brave companies who were focused on totally reinventing recruiting so that we could build a system which was far more accessible and inclusive compared to the one that we historically used. When George Floyd was murdered last year, it brought into sharp focus something that, quite honestly, we'd been sleeping on. We should have already realized. And that's that the system doesn't work for those who need it most. The right to the pursuit of happiness isn't dished out equally. And it was up to us to build a system where that ideal can have some real credibility. And so you're going to hear a lot from me today, again, forewarning, about why one of the key drivers of innovation in campus recruitment should be a desire to build a new system which places the candidate at the heart of the experience and is also fairer in terms of its inclusivity and accessibility. And society wins in that situation, as well as our partner companies. So today's conversation is going to focus on that, which is how do we redesign the system? How can we move away from cookie cutter solutions which produce cookie cutter results? Because we want to move towards a system like this, a system which fosters confident, diverse, work-ready candidates who have the conviction in where they want to work and can see a path to those roles. And from the company's perspective, it's about building high-performing, aligned workforces that make exceptional contributions to your company and exceptional contributions to society at large. So I've now spent a lot of time, the first 13, 14 minutes, rabbiting on about why we are here today. What does innovation mean? And so at this point, I'm excited to say that we're actually going to get into the meat of the conversation. And we're going to start by talking about 5 recruiting practices that we believe that you need to be behind in terms of the world of campus recruiting. But before we do that, we actually have a number of questions that we're going to ask the audience. And so the first question we're going to ask, so it will come up as a poll, which is, do you think it's important to find new ways to get students desk ready for their job? And so the implication of this is, if you think that they're already desk ready when they're walking in, then you're probably going to answer no. So I'll give you, okay, I can see the live poll here, very cool. Fantastic. Well, that's great. We're all on the same page here. Maybe it's not as controversial as I thought it would be. But now what you will get a sense of in all of this is that these questions obviously kind of lead into our initial, into these different practices. So the first practice we need to leave behind is this traditional model of hiring and then training. Historically, we've relied on universities to prepare students for the world of work. And While universities remain an important pathway into the world of work, it's now pretty much well accepted that universities don't do a great job of preparing students for the workforce. Indeed, that's not actually their purpose. That's not why they exist. Universities were built to serve as a place of academic development and research. So it's unfair for us to even assume that that is their role. Interestingly, when I was doing research for this, the birth of many community colleges in the 60s and 70s actually came as a result of universities trying to divert hordes of freshmen and sophomores that were coming into their system so that they could better focus on that core mission of research. But if universities aren't focused on getting students job ready before they start a career, who is? Well, at least, except in some circumstances, no one is. And the downstream impact of that is felt by both companies and by the candidate. Think about how the system has typically worked. You're a student, you get to the end of your college degree, you do an internship or two, when realistically there are like 20 different careers that you might be suited to. And then you blindly choose a career and throw yourself into it. I'm sure you've got children, I'm sure you've got relatives, and perhaps we can remember ourselves how much dumb luck is involved with choosing your first career. I joke all the time that I became a corporate attorney because I watched too much Suits and Boston Legal. I didn't have much else to go off, and shock horror, it's not a great reason to choose a particular career. It's where I am now. But from the company's perspective, it's not a great system either. You end up with a candidate that's not only not job ready, but they have no idea if they actually want to pursue that career. And so as a company, you try and overcome this by investing a ton of money, a ton of time, a ton of effort into training those hires, only for them to realize after the training process, which sometimes can take a year or two, that they aren't cut out for the role, that they're not interested in the role, that they want to do something else. Or maybe you realize that you didn't hire the best candidate for the role. There's not two winners in this scenario. There's not even one winner. Everybody loses using this model. And of course, we've included some stats on here, and we'll circulate this deck after. The stats obviously back this up. So that leads us to our next question, polling question today, which is, in a world of early talent where anything was possible, do you believe that resumes and interviews are still the right hiring signals? This is more interesting. Awesome. That's much more interesting. This is going to make my next section more controversial then. Fantastic. So we've got, I'm sure we can all see the results there. 66% say yes. So the next thing that I would argue is a bad practice is the idea that the GPA and the resume is a meaningful indicator of long-term success, or it's even a fair hiring filter. Given that we just discussed that the role of universities is not to train students for jobs, it rarely, if ever, makes sense to look at, and there are circumstances where it does, but to look at a student's GPA to determine whether they can do a job or not. A student's ability to write a 2,000-word paper on the role of the policy of appeasement, for example, in causing World War II is not a great way to figure out if you can stick a student in front of a client, whether they can build rapport, whether they can do a great job of representing your brand. Of course, there is some value that we can extract from academic performance. It can be an indicator for work ethic, for example, but for far too long, we've over-indexed it in the hiring process. And perhaps even more controversially, I would argue that the resume falls into the same bucket. We deal with a lot of students at Forage. Over 1 million students have enrolled in our courses, as I mentioned earlier, last year alone. And as we've got to know these students, it's become clear to me that the CV and resume is basically an artifact of privilege and not much else. The students who are able to build experience in their resume and CV in the early years are typically students who have two things: time and connections. They have networks they can lean in to get work experience, and they have time to pursue these opportunities because they don't have broader responsibilities, such as how to survive, how to put a roof over your head, how to pay your way through college. The number of exceptionally talented students that don't look great on paper that I've met who live in regional areas, low socioeconomic backgrounds, who can't afford to travel to another city, to another part of town to complete work experience, or they need to hold down a less glamorous job to pay their way through college, is not a negligible number. And finally, and perhaps most controversially of all, I would argue that looking at what college someone went to isn't also a great indicator for long-term success. A research paper, which we've linked in here, recently found that you are 77 times more likely to be accepted into an Ivy League school if you come from a family in the richest 1% of wealth, compared to if you come from a family in the bottom quintile of wealth. Let that sink in, 77 times more likely. In fact, only 3.8% of students in Ivy League schools come from a family in the bottom quintile of wealth. So unless we equate being born into wealth as a proxy for intelligence, which I'm sure no reasonable person does, we can't over-index the prestige of a college label. Of course, we attach some weight in some circumstances. We can't over-index that prestige as a hiring filter. It's more likely to indicate that someone was born into lucky circumstances rather than anything else. I actually read this great tweet the other day, which said that it's not that it said you didn't make good choices, you had good choices. And I thought that was like a really powerful way to frame the idea of not living in an even playing field. So that leads us on to our next survey question, which is, and this is a multiple choice one, and that's, in 5 years' time, do you expect to be hiring the same percentage of students with a 4-year degree that you are today? Good. This is also it's also controversial. You're getting a good split in opinions in these questions, except for the first one, of course. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, that leads us on to the next one that we're going to be talking about today, which is another idea that we'd love to see the back of, and that's the idea that we exclusively rely on campuses to source early talent. The irony of this presentation is that I've named it "How to Innovate Campus Recruiting," whereas I would posit that we need to stop calling it campus recruiting altogether and call it early careers, which I'll touch on later in the presentation. In the US, a 4-year college degree is basically treated as a prerequisite for most professional jobs, and in some respects, that makes a ton of sense. But a recent report found that 53% of employers rarely or never make a job offer to someone without a 4-year college degree. That's right, unless you're holding that piece of paper with a 4-year college degree, half of the companies in the US won't even hire you. And we need to pause and ask ourselves, why is it so important that someone has a 4-year college degree to do a particular job? Here's a scenario to consider. A student enrolls into a great university and they complete 3.5 years of a 4-year undergraduate degree. Academically, they do really well, but they decide to drop out of college with 1 semester to go, so they don't end up getting the degree. A company doesn't hire that student because they don't have a 4-year college degree. Do we really think that that final semester of study is the deciding factor between whether someone can or can't do a job? Of course not, especially when you remember that the purpose of the university isn't an exercise in job training. I believe that you are limiting yourself from so much talent by exclusively sourcing from campuses, especially diverse candidates from underserved and underrepresented communities. We've already briefly mentioned some of the stats, but so many people out there cannot simply afford to go to university for 4 years without an income and pay off college debt at a 10% interest rate. That doesn't mean they're not talented or that they're not capable. It just means that they face unique obstacles that others don't. And we're going to spend some time talking about this later. So that leads us to the next question. And I actually think we've jumped ahead here, and we've got an answer to this survey question already, which is, at what stage do you focus most of your recruiting energies? And I can see that we've got juniors look like they're the most concentrated. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. The next practice, I think, is probably like less controversial, although those stats are certainly interesting. But it's worth emphasizing that no recruitment strategy, and like certainly perhaps like the question was worded a bit oddly because there's recruiting and attraction, but no recruiting strategy it should not exclusively focus on how to win over juniors and seniors. And I don't need to spend a ton of time on this one, but a director of a big company that we know, who's the director of campus recruitment, recently put it to us that by the time a candidate is in their junior year, the battle for that candidate is already over. And I don't know if I would call it a battle. It is definitely a fierce competition out there, but I would actually go one step further and draw a parallel between a marriage and choosing your first career. Now, obviously, they're not the same. Unless you were my parents, who only knew each other for 3 weeks before they were getting engaged. They actually celebrated their 40th anniversary the other day, so they're still going strong. It's not usual that you try to, it's usual that you try to spend some time figuring out if you're a good match before you make that commitment. When a student chooses their first job, it should be treated as a commitment. It benefits both the student and it benefits the company. And 9 times out of 10, that match is not going to work if it's rushed and the first meaningful interaction between a company and a student is late in someone's degree. That leads us on to our next survey question for today, which is, should companies play a role in educating and skilling the workforce of the future? So that means that, when people aren't into, haven't actually started their job, like, should companies be playing a role in investing in their development? Okay, this one's more lopsided. Just have a sip of water. Fantastic. These are some really interesting results. So despite, and I can see it's shining at the moment, despite my receding hairline, I actually only graduated from college 8 years ago. But even in that even in the time that I graduated, the current crop of students is very different from my generation. And, I've recently been trying to figure out TikTok. It's like one of the ways that we're communicating with students. And for the life of me, I can't figure it out. So I already feel like an old fogey. But one thing I am absolutely certain of is that a transactional approach to hiring is not going to win over this generation of talent. The next generation of talent is the most informed, the most discerning, the most civically minded, and the most plugged in generation in history. Students have more choice when it comes to their career than ever before. Their decision-making process is very different to previous generations. They don't index salary, they don't index the historical prestige of a brand to the same extent that they once did. It's still a part of their decision-making process, but certainly not to the same extent that it once did. What they care about is, like, what does the employer stand for? Will I be proud working for this organization? Am I proud in the work that this company does? Does the mission resonate with me? That is the talent that organizations such as yourselves are trying to win over. And the competition, as I mentioned, is fierce. And you've got to ask yourself the tough question: do you believe your recruitment processes, your attraction strategies are optimized to capture the mind share of that generation? Because I would argue that there are a lot of campus recruitment strategies out there which are designed primarily from the perspective of the people who work in the company, not from the perspective of the candidate you're trying to win over. And many students we speak to refer to the campus recruitment process as analog, antiquated, inefficient, and daggy. So what I've learned building a product at Forage is that it's pretty much the same thing as building a recruitment process. As a technologist, we're focused on building a product which engages potential users. My team spends all of its time trying to understand our users. What do they care about? How do they communicate? Where do they hang out? What are their fears? What are their aspirations? By intimately understanding the user that we're trying to win over, we build processes and a product, well, at least we try to, with that user front in mind, so that the user will walk into the front door. So if you want to increase your talent pipeline, increase your acceptance conversion rate, mitigate your renege rate, or whatever key KPI you're looking at, I challenge you to go and intimately understand who you're trying to win over and build a process with the user at the heart of that experience. Because I can tell you what doesn't work. Uploading basic information onto your careers website with a link to your application process, and then asking for just like a CV or a transcript, and then expecting that you're going to end up with a pool of high intent, enthusiastic candidates who are going to stick around for a long time and make an exceptional contribution to your organization. And if you think that is the case, I would go and ask the people within your business if the people that are coming in do meet that threshold. But you know, what I think has been really inspiring to see is, especially probably over the last 3 or 4 years, this is becoming by far the exception rather than the rule with how companies are engaging and impacting early talent. Right, so now I can stop being a Grinch and focus on the fun stuff. Oh, I'm just going to go back there. And that's now I'm going to briefly talk about, so what can you be doing to innovate your campus recruitment strategies? Because everyone here, as we talked about at the beginning, has a mandate to find ways to level the playing field and build an impactful, inclusive, and accessible system. You shouldn't be doing this just because it's the right thing to do, but you should be doing it because your company will be far better off for it. One of our core values at Forage is not to play small. We never want to play small. We love to focus on fence swinging ideas, which we think that can genuinely turn the dial. So in the spirit of uncomfortable innovation and not playing small, I'm going to share today some strategic, significant ways I think you can think about when improving your campus recruitment strategies rather than small tweaks. So I want to totally acknowledge that some of these are going to be very hard to implement. They're going to take a lot of time, a lot of thought. They're challenging, but that's kind of the point. The point is that innovation isn't easy. Redesigning the system isn't easy. It's painful. And it's worth pausing and reminding ourselves why we're innovating here to begin with at all. And that's because the ideal candidate profile has changed. If we look at our boards and leadership teams of today, we can see the problem we're trying to solve staring back at us. I'm from Australia, if you can't tell where my weird accent's from. Some people say the UK. It's not the UK, it's Australia. And we have this frightening statistic in Australia that there are more male directors called Peter on the board of listed companies in Australia than women. No company today worth their salt is focused on hiring homogenous groups of candidates. We all want to hire, we're all competing over hiring high intent, confident, diverse candidates. So we're looking for a different output. We're looking for different candidates. And so to do that, we need to do things differently. The process needs to be different. It needs to be very different. So we're going to focus now on the 5 bold ideas on how you might be able to innovate your campus recruitment strategies. And they touch on the different parts of the recruitment lifecycle, whether it's engaging and nurturing, upskilling and work readiness, assessing and selecting, so at the recruitment stage itself, or the branding and attraction piece, which is obviously earlier. So the first one is the inverse of the first practice I said that we should let go of. And that's how figuring out how to flip the script and finding innovative ways to pre-skill candidates before hiring them. Training candidates first and then hiring them just makes a ton more sense for both you and for the candidate. In the old world, companies hire talent from the same talent pools and then train that talent. It was after the training phase that candidates would figure out, as we mentioned earlier, if that career was for them, or the company realized whether they are a great hire. But now the best companies are using technology to front load that training. They bring that training post-hire and bring it before the hire, and then you train forevermore afterwards. That enables them to connect with compatible talent from broad and diverse audiences. And you couldn't do that until we entered the age of software, right? Because you couldn't scale skills workshops, you couldn't scale internships, you couldn't scale conference events before technology, but now you can. And there's not, technology isn't without its risks. It's not nearly as accessible as we always think it is, but where used effectively, it can be the great equalizer. And universities remain an important part of that bridge, but universities remain an important part of the system, but the way I think about it, it's like a bridge. Right now, universities and other pathways are the first half of the bridge from the world of academia, learning and development into the world of work. Right now, universities don't get students the whole way across the bridge. And so the best companies are finding a way to build the second half of that bridge and deliver open access, last mile skill training. And of course, there are plenty of examples, and we've actually linked some of these examples. I've given examples of universities doing a great job of it, as well as companies. And of course, I'm biased in this situation, but it has been exceptional at Forage to work with so many incredible companies who have created these free open access training courses to pre-skill students with critical skills and confidence before they start careers, figure out where they want to start their career. They've actually figured out how to invest in the development of an incredibly large and diverse student audience in a high impact, but really a low effort way when you consider hundreds of thousands of students are being skilled through this way. Moving on to the next one. Secondly, the best companies have left the GPA, the college label and the CV behind. The best companies know that there are better ways to look at candidates. They've set themselves the difficult task of figuring out what those signals should be, how to collect them, how to track their effectiveness at predicting great talent. The great companies treat innovation as a science, not an art. And I know I'm speaking to a high-performing recruiting team when I ask them what their KPIs are, and they respond that their KPIs are on the downstream performance of hires, because that's what matters, right? If we aren't placing talent into companies that end up performing, then we've probably failed at our primary job. And so while acceptance rates, applicant numbers, reneg rates are all fine to track, just remember those measurements aren't measuring what really truly matters, and that is the downstream performance. The challenge is to figure out what those signals are which correlate to downstream success. And we know that the transcript, college name, and CV might be a part of that data mix, but it can't be the whole data mix. And a good analogy, a good summary from someone I read online about this is in the early days of Dropbox, Scott Woody, who was the former director of engineering, said they used to go to campus to source talent. And in his words, he would say, we would go to campus and we'd get 1,000 people who would apply for that school for an internship, but we'd only have 5 interviewers on campus. So what we would do is we'd get them to do a code screening software to tackle a simple problem. It was basically, can you code or not? we were trying to differentiate between classroom students and engineers. Now, that's pretty simplistic by today's standards, and it's not without its flaws, but I love the idea that Dropbox were trying to differentiate between the classroom student and engineers, because there is a clear difference, and that difference is felt downstream by the organization. So I've included here maybe like one type of matrix to think about. One thing I would add to this, it's not about just collecting signals at one point in time. It's also about collecting signals on candidates over an extended period of time, because that becomes a signal in itself. Has the student upskilled? Does the student have a sustained period of high intent to work at your organization? So there is like a latitude and a longitude to the way that we should be thinking about the skills matrix, that, you know, the skills signals that we're looking to hire for. I'm going to skip over that one. Awesome. So the next one is that today, most companies refer to their entry-level hiring recruitment teams as campus recruitment or university recruitment. But within the next 5 years, I suspect the best companies won't label or substantively run these teams as campus or university recruitment. Rather, we're going to see the emergence of early careers recruitment teams. Why? Because as I foreshadowed at the start, the best organizations know that relying on universities as the sole pool of talent is a flawed strategy. It's an incomplete strategy. That's not to say that recruiting from universities won't remain important, because it will. But to only source from universities means that companies will be accessing a tiny cohort of the great talent available. In the future, companies will source their talent for professional and technical roles from an expansive and intricate web of different pathways, including boot camps, community colleges, especially those with company-endorsed curriculums, corporate apprenticeships, and alternative company credentials. Last year, for example, Google launched its Google Career Certificate program. This new credential is designed to prepare candidates for in-demand jobs. I think it only costs a couple of $100 for someone to enroll in. And it's treated as the equivalent by Google as a 4-year college degree, despite only being 6 months in length. It's a fantastic example of this. Kent Walker, who's the Senior Vice President of Google, of Global Affairs at Google, wrote that college, when launching this, said that college degrees are out of reach for many Americans, and you shouldn't need a college diploma to have economic security. We need new, accessible job training solutions, from enhanced vocational programs to online education, to help America recover and rebuild. Remember, this happened last year post-COVID, which is the context to that. Sourcing early talent from pathways, from different pathways, not just college, not just 4-year colleges, will also help you source confident, high-intent candidates to your organizations, which are diverse. You want to build workforces, and I know you want to build workforces which reflect the strength and diversity of society. And let there be no mistake, there isn't a lack of diverse candidates out there. The corporate world, we have just historically relied on systems which are systematically inaccessible to the broader population. Okay, so the next practice we should consider implementing to our campus recruitment is to appreciate that the race for talent starts with students as soon as they walk into their freshman year. Some companies are even looking to engage and impact talent even earlier, with high schools becoming the new frontier of talent acquisition. One company that comes to mind that does an exceptional job of this is IBM. They've got their Pathways in Technology Early College High School program, or PTech. I'm sure many of you have heard about PTech, but it's a key project that provides high school students from underserved communities with the academic, technical, and professional skills and credentials to help them land competitive STEM jobs. And IBM have been doing this for 10 years, since 2011. They've got 240 school partners. It's a really thoughtful, impactful initiative, and it's creating a ton of opportunity for those who most likely wouldn't have it. So you should think about crafting a strategy where you're building a deep pipeline of talent over an extended period of time. You should be thinking about how it can impact attract young people from all backgrounds at different inflection points in their development. Within reason, I don't think you can really go too early. I mean, probably can go too early, but like within reason. The unevenness of the playing field starts the day that you are born. So finding ways to invest in the skills and the development of students earlier will have a disproportionate impact on them, and it will have a disproportionate impact on your downstream recruitment pipeline. It helps you build an initial meaningful touch point with talent far earlier than 99% of other companies. And trust me, people don't forget those who bet on them when no one else would. The very last one. If there is one last suggestion that I'd love for you to take away today, it's that the best recruitment strategies are the ones that figure out how to give more than they take. Times have changed and the world of early talent is expecting more from companies. We've entered the age of social enterprise. Companies that act as a leveling force in the uneven playing field of early talent are the real winners. We're seeing them win by giving more than they take and investing in initiatives that inspire the next generation of talent. They are immediately cast into the elite category by candidates. We hear it all the time from the students that we work with. This is the best and the most effective form of employer branding because students talk and word spreads. So what are great companies doing? They're solving that diversity issue by thinking creatively about transparency and access, because it all starts with that first door and early talent leaders are behind it. To them, it's not a compromise. They've ditched the idea that tackling diversity means making trade-offs or blindly investing billions of dollars. Instead, they figure out the tough problem of how to open their doors and remove barriers to entry. They let anyone, anywhere gain insights into what it's like to work at their company, providing people with invaluable skills along the way to help them pursue their career path. They own their role in training in the workforce of the future and feeding the foundation of diverse and inclusive corporate succession. So that brings me to the very end of my presentation today. You've been incredibly gracious to last with me this long. I hope most of you are still out there, and I appreciate your time. But before we get to the questions, I want to challenge you to realize that in many respects, we are standing at a fork in the road. The confluence of the events in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement, with COVID, with increasing wealth inequality, means that we as the early talent community could be one of the biggest drivers of social mobility, workplace productivity, and career satisfaction across the board. And the impact we could have on society and on the businesses that we represent shouldn't be underestimated. In many senses, we are all the custodians of economic opportunity, and that's not a responsibility we should treat lightly. And obviously, it's something that we observe isn't treated lightly. So I ask you, are we going to change the status quo or are we going to endorse it? Are we going to make those bold decisions or are we going to play it safe? Because if we want to innovate our campus recruitment strategies, I think we know what the answer has to be and what the path is that we're going to have to chart. So that wraps up my presentation. I also just want to kind of signal that we have our fantastic marketing lead, Brad, who's on our call today, has put together with Yaz, who's also on our team, this a summary of everything that I've spoken about today, which is the Innovator's Guide to Campus Recruiting. And that contains it's probably some more tactical, strategic levers that you might think about when crafting your campus recruitment strategy. But at that point, I'll stop. If anyone's got any questions, oh, I'm sorry, in terms of the thing, you can go to our website and download it. We've also got a link that you can download it from there. If you've got any problems, obviously just feel free to email me at tom@theforage.com. I thought my contact details were there, but they're not. But yeah, Meredith, it's probably a good place to like check in and see if there are any questions out there.
So we do have one question. Do you foresee or have seen any changes to background checks and drug tests and hiring practices evolve?
Yes, I mean, we have, to be honest, like we don't really, like where we work at Forage is typically in like the pre-recruitment phase rather than like in the recruitment phase itself. But certainly we've seen proliferation, like this is kind of the beauty of technology. We've seen like a proliferation of technology, which has enabled companies to become more sophisticated with the way that they do background checks. Another one we've seen is reference checks. We've seen some really interesting technology emerge around validating references. And so if you want to learn more about some of those different vendors, feel free to reach out to our team and we can kind of direct you to some of the great companies that we've come across in the space.
There are no other questions that have come in. We'll just give it a couple more seconds here and see if anything else comes in.
I've totally lost my voice.
This was a great and insightful presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think, Tom, if you want to go ahead and close, I don't see any other questions. Oh, wait.
Oh,
that was no. Oh. Aside from coding assessment, are there other ways organizations are working to engage who to proceed forward with the interview process aside from CVs?
Aside from coding assessments, yeah. So I mean, there's like a lot of great. So there are kind of two ways, as I was kind of talking about in the presentation, that you can kind of deal with this. There are the signals that you can collect at the recruitment stage. So like when you're actually running your recruitment campaign, like how do you collect deeper signals on candidates beyond just the CV and the interview process? And so there are some fantastic vendors out there. So, Pymetrics is one of them, Capfinity is the other. And what those tools are based at doing is like removing unconscious bias and also focusing on making like a cognitive assessment of the compatibility of talent for specific roles at specific companies, because companies realize that the GPA and the resume only tells part of the story. Obviously, why we're building Forage is we believe that you should be collecting those signals over an extended period of time. So you can start collecting signals on the intent of a candidate, on their work readiness, on their ability to upskill from when they're in freshman year. And so obviously, that's how we've built our product. Our courses kind of collect those signals, and our partner employers can access those signals and see the students that are aligned with their work, are upskilling. And so once you get to the interview process, you don't feel like you're flying blind as much. You have got a really good sense of the type of talent that's been engaged with your organization for an extended period of time. And it helps end up with a smaller pool of talent, which is more aligned to the work that you do. But there are some other fantastic vendors at that recruitment stage. And I know Capfinity and Pymetrics are two that jump to mind. But yeah, again, feel free to reach out to me if you want any recommendations on some companies doing some interesting stuff in this space.
Thank you, Tom. Do internships count as pre-skilling?
That is a great question, and I would say yes, it does. It does count as pre-skilling. I think the difference, though, is that as I mentioned in my conversation, you can't scale. Like historically, haven't been able to scale an internship program, so it's still kind of subject to the same limitations that we were subject to like 20, 30, 40 years ago, which is that you can only bring in like a handful of people to kind of test out that different career. And like time is finite. From a student's perspective, you might only get to do 2 or 3 internships in different careers during your college degree. But if you graduate from college, like there are so many different pathways you can choose. You might decide to go into the corporate sector, the not-for-profit sector. You might go into big tech. You might want to go into emerging tech. You might want to go into marketing. You might want to work internationally. There are just like so many options. And so internships are a form of pre-skilling, but I think what we're focused on at Forage is like, how do you scale that? How do you let students like try before they buy before that internship stage? And we think that using technology, whether it's conferences, virtual experience programs such as ours, skills workshops, are kind of more scalable, more inclusive, and more accessible forms of pre-skilling, which aren't designed to replace internships, but they're there to complement internships.
Thank you, Tom. Changing the mindset of leadership behind quote unquote campus recruiting and shifting to quote unquote early careers can be a challenge. Are there resources you recommend we tap into for gathering data to make the case?
Again, like I feel like I'm saying this is a great question, every question, but this is a great question because a lot of our partner organizations are navigating this. Like historically, the leaders of business are the ones who have, it's not the early talent, it's not the campus recruiting teams who over-index four-year college degrees, it's like the business leaders. And so what we've found is like the most effective way to show that talent can come from alternative pathways is to focus on collecting those signals and collecting like portfolios of work that shows to your business leaders that these students are highly capable and in many respects are more job ready than the students that they're hiring from through the four-year college degree program. So, we have like a strong thesis at Forage that in the future, think about like how you apply for a graphic design job, right? Like if you apply for a graphic design job, typically you show like a portfolio of your work and you look at the portfolio of work and say, yeah, like that person's like a great graphic designer. You actually look at the work product itself. Whereas in early talent space, we don't typically do that. We look at like your CV and your transcript. We're not actually looking at your work product. We're looking at these kind of disconnected signals. So the resources I would kind of focus on is like, it's hard, right? None of these things are easy to solve. But what I would look at is figuring out how to like get the work product or like collect work product from students from alternative pathways and then showcasing that work product to your leaders. And I promise you, if they've gone through like a boot camp or a 2-year commute, so if they went through like the IBM new collar program, I know that's like an example, that work can be like a very compelling way of breaking down the assumptions that people have that you need to have that 4-year college degree.
Thank you, Tom. We have one last question. With our company primarily based in the Midwest in the USA, any best practices on how to build brand visibility in the South and East to reach some of the major HBCUs? Yeah.
So like, I think without stating the obvious, like technology is your lever here. You have to think deeply about, so it's not just like blindly kind of spraying and praying everywhere, but you've got to work out how to use technology to scale your, getting your work, your people, your culture out there to the broader population. And I know we work with a bunch of large companies. So we also work with a lot of universities, right? We work very closely with universities. We work with about 15 HBCUs at Forage. We work with 200 schools globally. And what we know resonates with HBCUs, what we know resonates with any school is like, if they're not into kind of just like gimmicky recruiting or like branding and attraction things, they're looking for ways that they can add value to their students. Like how can they prepare their students for the world of work? How can they improve their students' employability? So when you're thinking about how do I get my employer brand to the South, to HBCUs, think about like, what is it that you have that you can give to those students and to those institutions? How can you contribute to investing in their development? And that's obviously squarely what we do at Forage, but you can directly reach out to the HBCUs themselves. But yeah, I would go back to that simple premise, like use technology and figure out how to give more than you take.
That was the last question, Tom. Go ahead and
Awesome.
And close, Tom. Yep.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Meredith. Well, again, I know this has been an hour, so it's been quite a long time. I'm even getting sick of my own voice, but I really appreciate everyone who has stayed to the end. And of course, feel free to reach out to our team if you're interested in learning what we do. My email is tom@theforage.com. I'm based here in San Francisco, and have a lovely weekend. And again, very appreciative for your time.
Thank you, Tom Brunskill and Forage, for a very informative session, and thank you participants for attending today's webinar. The archive, along with step-by-step instructions on how to receive these items, will be made available within 3 to 5 business days. Please note that the PowerPoint presentation will be made available following today's webinar. We would like to thank you for attending today's session. This officially concludes the webinar, and you may now sign off.